My 7-year-old daughter, Gracie, stood there, holding the microphone at my uncle's 60th birthday party, her small voice cutting through 200 guests. "Uncle Frank, should I play the recording of what you do to me at night?" The champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. The sound of breaking crystal echoed through the country club ballroom like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. The jazz band's saxophone died mid-note. 200 faces turned toward my little girl in her purple party dress, standing at the microphone stand that was almost taller than she was. "I'm Veronica, and I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. I'm 32 years old, a single mother, and I work 60 hours a week as a marketing manager to keep a roof over our heads. My daughter, Gracie, is 7, loves unicorns, hates broccoli, and carries her tablet everywhere like it's a security blanket. She's been my whole world since her father walked out on us last year for his 23-year-old yoga instructor. The man standing frozen in the center of that ballroom, my Uncle Frank, wasn't just family. He was the family patriarch, the success story everyone else was measured against. 60 years old, built like an ex-football player gone slightly soft, with silver hair that cost more to style than I spent on groceries. He owned half the commercial real estate in Phoenix and never let anyone forget it. My mother, Darlene, stood by the bar in her signature pearls, her face draining of color as she watched her brother. She'd worshipped Frank since they were kids, always taking his side, always making excuses. My father, Mitchell, sat at their table staring at his hands like he always did when things got uncomfortable. 35 years of marriage, and he'd never once stood up to anyone in my mother's family. Aunt Teresa, Frank's wife of 30 years, had been holding court near the chocolate fountain, her diamonds catching the light as she laughed at someone's joke. Now she stood perfectly still, her champagne glass suspended halfway to her lips, watching her husband like she'd never seen him before. But Gracie just stood there, calm as could be, her little fingers wrapped around the microphone, waiting for an answer to her question. The same little girl who still needed a nightlight, who made me check under her bed for monsters every night, was standing in front of Phoenix's elite without a trace of fear. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Frank's voice cracked on the last word. He tried to laugh, that same booming laugh that usually filled every room he entered, but it came out strangled and wrong. Gracie tilted her head the way she did when she was thinking hard about something. "You heard me, Uncle Frank. Should I play the recording? You always say, honesty is the most important thing in our family. That's what you said in your speech earlier, right? Before you called my mommy those mean names?" I'd been dreading Uncle Frank's 60th birthday party for 3 weeks, ever since the gold-embossed invitation arrived at our apartment. The country club ballroom was exactly what you'd expect from Frank. Crystal chandeliers that threw rainbow patterns across the walls, a live jazz band imported from New Orleans, and 200 of Phoenix's wealthiest residents, pretending they actually enjoyed each other's company. I smoothed down my black cocktail dress, the only one I owned that still fit properly after the stress of the divorce, and held Gracie's hand a little tighter as we walked through the massive oak doors. "Remember what we practiced, baby," I whispered to her, bending down to adjust the purple bow in her hair. "Just smile, say happy birthday to Uncle Frank, and we can leave right after dinner. 2 hours maximum, I promise." Gracie nodded solemnly, clutching her small silver purse that held her tablet. She never went anywhere without it these days. Ever since her father David left us 13 months ago, she'd become quieter, always recording little videos for what she called her diary, or playing those mindless matching games that kept her calm. The child therapist said it was her way of processing the abandonment, creating a record of her life that couldn't just walk away like her father had. The room was already buzzing with conversation and fake laughter. My parents stood near the bar, Mom in her signature 3-strand pearls that Frank had bought her for her 50th birthday. Dad looking profoundly uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo. They'd been married 35 years, but you'd never know they were happy from looking at them. They looked more like business partners at a mandatory conference than a couple at a celebration. "Veronica?" Finally, Mom rushed over, her heels clicking against the marble floor, air kissing my cheek to avoid smudging her lipstick. "Frank's been asking where you were. You know how he gets when family doesn't show up on time. This is an important night for him." "Traffic was terrible, Mom." The lie came as easily as breathing. The truth was, I'd sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel and trying to convince myself to walk in. I'd even typed out 3 different excuse texts before deleting them all. Missing Frank's birthday would have caused more drama than attending it. Frank had always been the golden child in our extended family, the success story everyone else was measured against. Started with nothing after their father died when he was 18, built a real estate empire from a single rental property, married the perfect trophy wife from old Scottsdale money. Every family gathering became a testimonial to Frank's brilliance, Frank's generosity, Frank's perfect life. But I knew a different Frank, the one who'd made my teenage years a special kind of hell with his jokes about my developing body, his comments about how I'd never amount to anything like him, his way of making every family gathering about worshiping at the altar of his success while subtly tearing everyone else down. "There's my favorite niece," Frank's voice boomed across the room like thunder. He was already 3 drinks in, I could tell by the flush spreading across his cheeks and the way he stood just a little too straight, overcompensating for the slight sway in his stance. He strode over, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the floor, and pulled me into a hug that lasted 2 seconds too long. His cologne was overwhelming, the same expensive brand he'd worn for 20 years, and his hand lingered on my lower back in a way that made my skin crawl. "Veronica, you look good. Finally lost that baby weight, I see." He laughed at his own comment, even though Gracie was 7 years old. "And little Gracie, how's my prettiest grandniece?" Gracie pressed closer to my leg, mumbling a quiet, "Hi, Uncle Frank." "Still shy, huh?" "Just like her mother was at that age. Though you grew out of that, didn't you, Ronnie?" He winked at me and I felt my stomach turn. Grew out of a lot of things. Teresa appeared at his elbow, her smile as perfectly maintained as her Botox. "Frank, darling, the Weatherby's just arrived. You should go say hello." She turned to me, her eyes never quite meeting mine. "Veronica, you and Gracie are at table 12, near the kitchen doors, I'm afraid. But we had so many last-minute RSVPs from Frank's business associates." The message was clear. Family by obligation, not by choice. We were there to fill seats and play our parts in the grand production of Frank's perfect life. I guided Gracie through the crowd, past the ice sculpture that somehow looked exactly like Frank's profile, past the photo displays of his business achievements, toward our table in the back where we could eat our overpriced chicken and escape as soon as the speeches ended. I had no idea that in 2 hours, my 7-year-old daughter would destroy Frank's entire world with just one question. The party started normally enough, if you could call anything about Frank's celebrations normal. Gracie stayed pressed against my side while I made small talk with cousins I hadn't seen since last Christmas, all of us performing the familiar dance of pretending we were a close family rather than strangers who shared DNA. My cousin Bethany complimented my dress while her eyes cataloged everything wrong with it. Her husband Roger talked about his promotion while sneaking glances at the 20-somethings waitresses. Gracie sat quietly tapping away on her tablet, recording one of her video diary entries or playing her games. Dinner was served precisely at 7. Salmon that cost more than my electric bill and vegetables carved into flowers that no one actually ate. Frank held court at the head table, regaling everyone with the story of his latest acquisition, a shopping complex he'd bought for pennies on the dollar from what he called motivated sellers, which was Frank's way of saying desperate families facing foreclosure. Then came the speeches. Teresa went first, reading from note cards about what a wonderful husband Frank was, how generous, how devoted. My mother followed, tears in her eyes as she talked about her amazing brother who'd stepped up when their father died, who'd become the man of the family at just 18. The words felt rehearsed, like she'd been saying them so long she actually believed them. Frank stood up last, microphone in hand, that familiar smirk spreading across his face as the room applauded. He was in his element now, the center of attention, the king surveying his kingdom. "You know, turning 60 makes you reflect on family," he began, his voice carrying that false warmth he used for clients. "Family is everything. It's what drives us, what defines us. Some family members lift you up, support your success, celebrate your achievements." He paused, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me with laser precision. And others, well, others are just like their mothers, lying sluts who destroy families. The words hit me like a physical blow. The room went silent for a heartbeat, nobody quite sure they'd heard correctly. Then nervous laughter rippled through the crowd like a wave. My mother's face turned red, but she laughed along, that same nervous titter she used when Frank went too far. Dad stared at his plate like the carved radish rose was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. "Take my niece Veronica here," Frank continued, pointing his champagne glass directly at me, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. 32 years old, couldn't keep a husband, can barely keep a job, and look at that poor kid of hers. Always on that damn tablet because her mother can't be bothered to actually parent. Too busy feeling sorry for herself to notice her daughter's turning into a social reject. Gracie's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight. I could feel her trembling. "Frank, that's enough," someone said weakly from another table. But Frank was just getting started, drunk on alcohol and his own power. "Enough? I'm just getting started. This is my birthday, and I'll say what everyone else is thinking." He took another swig of champagne. "You all remember when little Ronnie was 16? Made up that whole story about me being inappropriate with her?" He made air quotes, his voice dripping with mockery. "As if I'd ever look twice at a chunky teenager with braces and acne. I mean, come on." The laughter was louder now, uncomfortable, but real. These people, Frank's carefully curated guests, would laugh at anything he said because he held their mortgages, owned their office buildings, controlled their financial futures. "She was so desperate for attention," Frank continued, now pacing like a prosecutor presenting his closing argument. "Just like her mother was at that age. Right, Darlene? Remember when you used to make up stories about boys liking you? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Generation after generation of women who can't tell the truth if their lives depended on it." My mother nodded along, her smile painted on, but her eyes dead. "She always was dramatic," Mom said into her wine glass, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Always making things up for attention." The betrayal cut deeper than Frank's words ever could. My own mother, throwing me under the bus again, choosing him again, just like when I was 16 and scared and trying to tell someone, anyone, that Frank kept finding excuses to be alone with me. Kept making comments about my body, kept accidentally walking in when I was changing. Tears burned hot down my cheeks. I stood to leave, pulling Gracie up with me, but Frank wasn't done. "Oh, don't go running off like you always do, Ronnie. Just like when you were a teenager, can't face the truth about yourself. This is what's wrong with your generation. No accountability, always the victim, never taking responsibility for your failures." That's when Gracie pulled away from my hand and started walking toward the microphone stand. Gracie moved through the crowd with a determination I'd never seen in her before. Her purple party dress swished around her knees as she walked, her little patent leather shoes clicking against the marble floor with each purposeful step. The band had stopped playing, confused by this tiny interruption to their set. She reached the microphone stand, which towered over her small frame, and had to stand on her tiptoes to reach it. "Excuse me," her small voice echoed through the speakers, clear as a bell. "Uncle Frank?" The entire room turned to look at her. 200 faces, all focused on my 7-year-old daughter, standing alone at the front of the ballroom. Frank laughed, that condescending chuckle he reserved for people he considered beneath him. "Look at this. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree," he announced to his audience. "What attention-seeking drama is this? Did Mommy tell you to come up here, sweetheart?" Gracie shook her head slowly. "No, Uncle Frank. Mommy doesn't know I'm doing this. But you said my mommy tells lies, and that's not true. I don't lie. Lying is bad. My mommy taught me that." "Of course it is, sweetheart," Frank said, his voice dripping with false sweetness as he started walking toward her. "Why don't you go back to your mother now?" "The adults are talking." "But you lie," Gracie said simply, her voice steady in a way that seemed impossible for a 7-year-old facing down a room full of adults. "You lied about being at a business meeting last Tuesday. You were in Mommy's room when she was at work. I saw you." The room went completely quiet. Teresa's perfectly maintained smile faltered, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Frank's face shifted from amused condescension to something darker. Kids say the darndest things, Frank said, forcing another laugh that nobody joined. Veronica probably coached her to say this, another desperate attempt for attention. I have a recording, Gracie interrupted, pulling her tablet from her small purse. The device looked huge in her tiny hands. I record everything from my video diary. My therapist said it's good to keep track of my feelings and what happens each day. Like when you came to our house last week when Mommy was at work. You used a key to get in. You said you were checking on us, but you went into Mommy's room and stayed there for a long time. My blood turned to ice. I had no idea Frank had been in my house. We'd changed the locks after David left, but Frank had helped us move in originally. Had he made a copy? The thought made my stomach heave. This is ridiculous, Frank said, but his voice had lost its confident boom. I've never been to your apartment without your mother knowing. That's another lie, Gracie said matter-of-factly. You've been there lots of times. 17 times in the last 3 months. I counted. You always come between 10 and noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays when Mommy's at her big meetings. Sometimes you stay for an hour. Teresa stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Frank, what is she talking about? She's a confused little girl, Frank said quickly. Probably saw a maintenance man or someone else and got confused. Gracie shook her head again. I'm not confused. You said mean things about Aunt Teresa when you were in Mommy's room. You said she was stupid and boring, and you were doing weird things with Mommy's clothes, taking pictures, smelling them. You went through her dresser drawers and took something. I couldn't see what because I was hiding in the hallway, but you put something in your pocket. The silence in the room was deafening. Every single person sat frozen, watching this little girl systematically destroy Frank's carefully constructed image with the precision of a surgeon. Should I play the recording? Gracie asked innocently, her finger hovering over the tablet screen. You always say that evidence is important, Uncle Frank. That's what you said when you were on the phone with your lawyer last month about that lawsuit. You said evidence is everything. Frank started moving toward her more quickly now, his face flushed dark red. Give me that tablet right now, young lady. I jumped up, my maternal instincts overriding my shock, but before I could move, my father stood up. My quiet, passive father, who hadn't stood up to anyone in 35 years, was on his feet. Don't you take another step toward that little girl, Frank. Dad's voice was low and dangerous, a tone I'd never heard from him before. Frank stopped, looking around the room at his guests, his carefully curated audience of people who owed him money, favors, or both. But even they were looking at him differently now, suspicion replacing admiration. Play it, Teresa's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Play the recording, Gracie. Gracie touched her tablet screen with the confidence of a child who'd grown up with technology. She held the microphone up to her device, and suddenly Frank's voice filled the ballroom, crystal clear through the expensive sound system he'd insisted on having for his party. Stupid Teresa. Thinks I'm at a meeting with the Riverside Development Group. She actually believes I spend 3 hours every Tuesday looking at blueprints. God, she's gotten so boring. 20 pounds heavier than when we married. Talks about nothing but her book club and her Pilates classes. I come here when Veronica's at work sometimes, just to remember what it's like to want something you can't have. There was a rustling sound on the recording, like fabric being moved. This is Veronica's bed. She sleeps right here on the left side, even though she's alone now. Still can't break the habit from when that loser David was here. These are her sheets. That silky purple set. They smell like her, like that vanilla perfume she wears. The same perfume Darlene wore when we were teenagers before she married that useless Mitchell. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The recording continued, and Frank's real voice got louder, more desperate as he moved toward Gracie. That's enough! Turn it off! But Gracie stepped back, keeping the microphone close to her tablet as Frank's recorded voice continued. Darlene should have been mine. I saw her first, loved her first, but she chose Mitchell because our parents said it would be weird, us being siblings and all. But I knew we weren't really siblings, not by blood. Mom had that affair, everyone knew it. I wasn't Dad's real son. We could have been together. And Veronica. God, Veronica looks just like Darlene did at 32. Sometimes, when I'm standing in this room, going through her things, I pretend she's Darlene, that I got the life I was supposed to have. The sound of drawers opening came through the speakers. These are her underwear, the nice ones she never wears anymore since David left. This black lace pair. I'm taking these. She'll never notice. Just like she never notices that I kept her spare key from when I helped her move in. Stupid woman, trusting me like that. Though she wasn't so stupid when she was 16. She knew what I wanted then, tried to tell people, but nobody believed her. Dramatic little Veronica making up stories. If only they knew how many nights I've stood in her doorway while she slept. She's so beautiful when she's unconscious, when she can't look at me with those judging eyes. Teresa's scream cut through the recording. She grabbed a full bottle of champagne from the nearest table and hurled it at Frank, missing his head by inches as it shattered against the wall behind him. "You sick bastard! You've been stalking your own niece? Stealing her underwear?" The recording wasn't done. Frank's voice continued, getting more disturbing with each word. 17 times I've been here now. Each time I get a little braver. Last week I touched her pillow, put my face where hers goes. Next time, maybe I'll be here when she gets home. Maybe there'll be an emergency, a reason I had to be here. Maybe she'll be grateful, vulnerable. Maybe she'll finally see that I'm the one who really loves her. Not like that pathetic David, not like any of those losers she dates. I've loved her since she was born, watched her grow up, watched her become exactly what I knew she would be. Mine. She was always supposed to be mine. The recording stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Teresa's sobbing and the sound of champagne still dripping from the wall. Frank lunged for Gracie then, his face purple with rage, but he didn't make it 2 steps. My father, my quiet, passive father, tackled him to the ground with a force that sent them both sliding across the polished floor. Dad pulled back his fist and punched Frank square in the jaw, then again and again. "My daughter!" Dad's voice broke with rage and tears. "You sick piece of garbage! She was a child. She came to us for help and we didn't believe her. And you've been in her home touching her things, you perverted monster!" Security rushed in, pulling Dad off Frank, but the damage was done. Frank's nose was broken, blood streaming down his face onto his expensive suit. But worse than the physical damage was the way everyone was looking at him, their faces twisted with disgust and horror. "There are more recordings," Gracie said calmly, as if she hadn't just destroyed a man's entire life. 43 of them, from all the times he came over. Sometimes he stayed for 2 hours. Sometimes he took things. Mommy's hairbrush once. A picture of her from the fridge. Her favorite coffee mug. Should I play more? "No, baby," I managed to say through my tears, dropping to my knees and pulling her into my arms. "No more." "You did so good. You did so good, my brave girl." Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Someone had called 911. Frank tried to stand, but 3 of his own security guards held him down, their faces grim. Even they, paid to protect him, couldn't stomach what they'd heard. The police arrested Frank that night in front of everyone. They didn't let him clean the blood off his face or straighten his torn tuxedo. He was handcuffed right there on the marble floor of his own birthday party, read his rights while 200 of Phoenix's elite watched and recorded on their phones. By morning, the videos were everywhere. The local news picked it up by noon. Within a week, Frank's real estate empire began crumbling as investors pulled out and banks called in loans. The recordings Gracie had made were turned over to the police as evidence, all 43 of them, documenting 3 months of Frank entering my home without permission. She'd started recording after she came home sick from school one day and saw Frank leaving our apartment. Being 7 and smart, she knew something was wrong but didn't know how to explain it. So she did what she'd been doing since the divorce. She documented everything. The police found the camera Frank had installed in my bedroom vent during their search, hidden but not yet activated. He'd been building up to something worse, they told me. The pattern of escalation was clear. They also found a box in Frank's home office with items from my apartment. Things I hadn't even noticed were missing. My hairbrush, a pillowcase, 3 pairs of underwear, photos of me taken without my knowledge, some from inside my home while I slept. 3 other women came forward after news of his arrest spread. My cousin Patricia in Tucson, who'd suddenly moved away 10 years ago. My dad's cousin Rebecca, who'd cut all contact with the family 5 years back, Frank's own secretary from his first office, who'd quit abruptly 15 years ago. They all had stories. They'd all tried to tell someone. Nobody had believed them either. My mother came to my apartment the next morning, looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her perfect makeup was gone, her eyes swollen from crying. "I'm sorry," she whispered, standing in my doorway like she wasn't sure she deserved to come in. "When you were 16 and tried to tell me about Frank, I knew. Part of me knew you were telling the truth, but believing you meant admitting I'd failed to protect you. It meant admitting my brother was a monster. It was easier to call you a liar than face that I'd let him near my child. Why didn't you protect me?" It was all I could ask through my tears. Because I was a coward. Because Frank controlled everything, held the purse strings, made all the decisions after Dad died. Because I was weak and selfish and chose my comfort over my daughter's safety. There's no excuse good enough. I failed you in the worst way a mother can fail. I didn't forgive her that day, or the next. But eventually, through months of therapy, both individual and together, we began to rebuild something. Not what we had before, but something more honest. Teresa divorced Frank immediately and testified against him at trial. She told me she'd suspected affairs but never imagined this. There had been signs she'd ignored. His obsession with family photos of me, always wanting to know where I was, the way he'd say my name in his sleep. She gave me all the recordings from their home security system, which showed Frank watching videos of me on his computer late at night, zooming in on family photos, sometimes for hours. Dad became the father he should have been all along. He testified against Frank, stood up in court and called him a predator who'd hidden behind family loyalty and wealth. He moved out of the house he'd shared with Mom for a month, said he needed to figure out how he'd become someone who wouldn't protect his own daughter. When he came back, he was different, stronger. He went to therapy, joined a support group for families of abuse survivors. Frank got 15 years. The judge said the recordings revealed a deeply disturbed pattern of escalation that likely would have prevented a violent assault. His lawyer tried to suppress Gracie's recordings, claiming they were made illegally by a minor, but the judge ruled that a child protecting her mother in her own home had every right to record an intruder. At Gracie's 8th birthday party 6 months later, a small gathering with just our rebuilt family circle and her therapist, who'd become like family, she stood up with a microphone again. But this time, her words were different. "Thank you all for coming to my party. And thank you for believing kids when they tell the truth." Sometimes the smallest voices say the biggest things. My mommy says I'm brave, but I was just doing what she taught me, telling the truth and protecting the people we love. My mother cried. Dad held her hand, and I realized that sometimes it takes a child's courage to shatter the silence that protects monsters. Frank's real estate empire was liquidated to pay lawsuits from multiple victims. The country club banned our entire family after that night, but it was the best gift Frank ever gave us. Freedom from pretending everything was perfect when it never was. If you've made it this far in my story, thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been dismissed or not believed, know that your truth matters. Like this video, if it touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories of courage and survival. Your story deserves to be heard, too. Comment below if you've ever had to stand up to someone everyone else protected. You're not alone.